Welcome to the Mike and Doug Show. I'm Doug. Hi, Mike.
Hey, Doug.
Well, today it's Jamie Dimon, who I like to call the George Soros of banking. And the reason
Mm.
for that is because everything he says is a lie. And if you want to become rich, do the opposite of what George Soros or Jamie Dimon says. But today, you are going to reveal what the miners have come up with, digging very deep, ending up in Smyrna, Turkey, uh, with some of your research, which has some fascinating connections to the work that we've been doing, especially with the Babylonian Radhanites. So today, Jamie Dimon, the man with the diamonds on the heels of his shoes, he's like a person who rips off the diamond mines and then completely manipulates the entire banking world. The largest bank in America, basically, J.P. Morgan Chase, which basically says Rothschild slash Rockefeller. He's the head of, and he used to be at the New York central bank for the Fed, which is the most corrupt place in economic history for fascist capitalism. But today you're going to tell us all about the background of Jamie Dimon and how it is that he has come into such a powerful position. So, Mike, what have you and the miners discovered?
One of the things we have been doing is looking at a lot of his speeches lately on video, especially related to the banking collapses. And one of the things that strikes you right away is this guy's so cocky. He clearly knows he's on top of some system and that he is driving the bus. But that's an open question. Is he driving the bus? But certainly he's driving the bus in the United States. That we can see. And so one of the things we started doing, as we normally do, is we just start looking at the public information out there and then work from there. And unusually, for a lot of the biographies of these corruptocrats, is the biographies talk a lot about his father and his grandfather. And so we went looking and reading and investigating the history of his family. And it goes back to a place that probably nobody's heard of called Smyrna, Turkey. And his background is Greek. His original family name was Papadimitriou, which is named after a third century pope from Alexandria, which is down in Egypt. And but that's a Greek name. So it looks like he has a Greek heritage. I say looks like because as we are now figuring out is the persona that is put forward by a lot of these banking cartel members is often different than what is advertised. For example, we've now discovered that a lot of the bankers of history claim to be Jewish, but they likely are not, and they are Babylonian. They are Turkish, Persian, Sogdian, and even some Chinese. So we dug into the Smyrna Turkey connection, and that comes from his grandfather, who was born in the late 1800s and was a representative of the Bank of Greece for the British government in Turkey, specifically in Smyrna. And Smyrna was so important to the British that the British actually had a consul both in consul, both in Constantinople and south in Smyrna. Now, why Smyrna? Well, if you recall our discussion, our investigation into the latest Supreme Court justice and her connection with the Boston Brahmins, what we discovered is that in the early 1800s, when the British gave up their slaves on paper in the Slavery Act of 1833, we discovered that the British East India Company started cutting deals with various Boston families, and they started developing a opium trade from Boston to Smyrna, Turkey, and then on to China, which is where the British East India Company fomented two different wars with the Chinese to guarantee that the opium exports out of Turkey that all flowed through Smyrna, which was their banking headquarters outside of Boston and London, would be guaranteed, so that the opium traffic, most of which was actually owned by British companies who bought the fields, the opium fields, the poppy fields in Turkey, would then control the harvest, and then they would control the shipping from Smyrna, Turkey, specifically to China. And the city of London and Boston basically were tied at the hip at that point. And so Smyrna was certainly on our radar screen. And then, wouldn't you know it, we discovered that Jamie Dimon's grandfather was the key player that handled the British opium exports from Turkey right up until the end of World War II, and World War One, and specifically World War One was over in 1919, and then immediately what we see is the Allies, they allowed Smyrna to be controlled by the Greeks, not the Turks. And as soon as the Allied armies pulled out, the Turks started attacking the Greeks and overtook Smyrna. So from the end of World War II on, Smyrna, Turkey came under the control of the Ottomans, and the entire trade in opium, which had for the last 100 years actually been a form of currency for the British government and the Boston Brahmins in the United States, transferred from Smyrna, Turkey to the city of London officially. So there we have it. We have another cardboard cutout in Jamie Dimon, who was born in the US. His grandfather moved to the US in 1920 during the Turco-Greco War, and began banking immediately, and then got his son involved, who was Jamie's father. His name was Theodore Dimon. So when he got to the United States, he changed Papo Demetrio to Dimon. Various spellings, by the way. D-I-M-O-N is one spelling. D-E-M-O-N is another spelling, which gets awfully close to demon. And we see that when little Jamie was born, he immediately, after he was placed in a posh boarding school in New York, called what was the name of it? The Browning School, and that was actually a school started by John D. Rockefeller, one of the founders of the Pilgrim Society. And then we see a number of graduates from the Browning School, also members of the Pilgrim Society. And then once Jamie began his career, he was immediately placed at the top with all of the banks, essentially all the banks in New York at that time. So he's clearly a groom. He never worked a day in his life. He was given his positions, and he obviously was a dutiful order taker of the city of London, and has been his whole career. And then, of course, was put in top of J.P. Morgan, which had its start in the relationship in the late 1800s between his dad and the Rothschilds and George Peabody, all the some of the major robber barons of that age. And then, so when J.P. Morgan came over and started his bank in his name, that was a Rothschild bank. From the beginning, Rothschild fully funded the J.P. Morgan Bank, which was originally the Manhattan Bank, which was started by none other than Alexander Hamilton, which was the fourth bank that Hamilton had facilitated as a founder of our country. Clearly a traitor. We now proved that he was British spy number 7, managed out of Ottawa in Canada, and that he was specifically tasked with setting up our banks, which then compromised the entire American economy. The curious thing about the story of Hamilton is that he was so committed to an Anglo um, banking system, a unified Anglo banking system, that the people who called themselves, before the term Republican became a term for a party, uh, Hamilton's banks were giving preference to loyalists and in all sorts of businesses. And that preference got so bad that he got well known for being a British loyalist. And that triggered the formation of the Republican Party, because the Republicans, the people who were against federalism, wanted loans to do business, and Hamilton's banks were not giving them that. And that included the Manhattan Bank, which is now the J.P. Morgan Chase Bank. So there we have the takeover of America occurred through the banking system, not by wars. The British pulled out their troops, but they did not. They sent in their banks at that point, and that bank today is obviously the leader at the top of that is J.P. Morgan, which Jamie Dimon was placed in charge of. He didn't earn a darn thing in his life.
And yet,
There you go.
they pay him, what was it, last 34 million a year or more, plus his benefits and his
I forgot. He's
stock
a genius.
holdings. Oh, he's a genius, of course. And isn't it funny that, even the book of Revelation, in speaking of materialism, writes a letter to Smyrna and basically warns them not to be materialists, even though, which is basically, then you talk about the Turkish-Greek war, that really was over Cyprus. And what is Cyprus? It's an offshore banking kingdom of the British, of the Pilgrim Society. And to this very day, the Russian oligarchs put their money into Cyprus offshore accounts. And so Jamie Dimon, being Greek and also being Turkish in a certain sense, reminds me of Bojo, reminds me of Boris Johnson and his dad, who were Turks, who were Muslims, and who also worked out of the western part of Anatolia in Turkey. And so what we see here is just the old boys club. This might as well be a mafia. And Jamie Dimon has the ring of the dawn that you have to kiss, because the SEC allows Jamie Dimon and a few other banks to manipulate the silver market. Clearly, they were investigated for years. They were charged with crimes. And then they came out and said, but the Treasury and the SEC allows us to do this. In other words, Jamie Dimon and J.P. Morgan Chase Manhattan plus Citibank plus a few others, they act with impunity. They cannot be prosecuted. They are too big to be taken down, is the way that they look at it. Yeah. And when the TARP money came along, they gave Jamie Dimon a check for $25 billion. And what did he say when he received the check? We don't need this money. We have plenty of money. The other banks were crashing, and Jamie Dimon saying, oh, no, we're completely solvent. Don't worry about us.
Let me point out a couple more facts about that 2008 TARP. There were two people who were the leaders of the Pilgrim Society in the U.S. that year, and that was Henry Kissinger and Paul Volcker, former Fed chairman and Treasury secretary. So we have the Pilgrims nailed with hard evidence at the time of the TARP, which Jamie got 25 billion of in his banks. So these aren't his banks, obviously. This is an extension of the Bank of England, which is controlled by the Rothschilds and the Pilgrims. And so this is all hard evidence. We're not making any of this up. And so here we go again. Our media is completely ignoring the elephants in the room and won't talk about any of this monopoly of our banks, which has been going on for 200 years. What I see going on right now is, with this consolidation of banks into J.P. Morgan, is the British Pilgrim Society is intent on creating a copy of the Bank of England in the United States. And clearly, JP Morgan Chase has been tapped to be that bank. So once you have that and you've got control of the Fed in issuing currency, then you're back to the situation you're talking about with the control of gold and silver, which is an old story now. Those are used as the credits behind the issuance of currency and loans. And if you're the one issuing that currency, you can issue as much currency as you want. And clearly that's where we're headed.
Oh, yes. And he, as you say, he's earned nothing. He was not a genius. He was not in any way a clear thinker. He is a liar. All you have to do is listen to anything he says, and you go, but wait, that's not true. And he literally says that his bank, JP Morgan Chase, makes markets. Now,
Yeah.
when you say you make markets, that means you're manipulating the stock market. That means you're inventing nonsense that take 401k money, take government money, take government infusion, uh, and you basically you have carte blanche. You have a
By
blank
doing
check.
by doing what? By controlling propaganda. And here we have the Reuters, we have Associated Press, all handled through what was at one point named the Empire Press Union, which was formed in 1909 at the same time as all the British intelligence agencies were formed. Coincidence? No. The propaganda is the keys to the kingdom here. Yeah, you can make markets if you make up a story about a company and get the lemmings in the stock market to either buy or sell, and you know that's going to happen, then you make sure your position is leveraged so that you will make money no matter whether the stocks are going up or down.
Our central bank system is, as you say, based upon the British central bank system, the Bank of England, and that was, of course, taken from basically Babylonian Radhanites who styled themselves Ashkenazi Jews for
Right.
thousands of years in Venice, in Constantinople, and later through the British East India Company. So when we're talking about what you have brought up here today, that the original banks of America were nothing more than British agents. They were crown agents, and they were nothing more than an extension of the British East India Company, which fought on the East Coast, the Dutch East India Company, for the rulership of America. And to this very day, they still rule America. It's now called the Pilgrim Society.
Yeah.
Now, Jamie is beautiful, beautiful, because he was placed, it's this old thing. It's like trading baseball cards. You go from the CEO of American Express to one of the head people at the New York Fed, which basically controls our entire economy. It's the central bank that is whoever's at the top of that doesn't get voted in. They're always in. They're always the leader. And then he goes from one bank to the other through the Boston Brahmins, then into New York, and then basically on his own. And now he thinks he is all that. And that's the disgusting part to me. I want to vomit every time I hear him open his mouth because
Yeah,
it's
the
nothing but a
media,
lie.
the media just treats him as some sort of darling and heaps praise on, effusive praise on him as if he knows what he's doing and that this is just the magic of a oligarch and their superior knowledge. Well, yeah, if you're controlling the issuance of currency and you're controlling propaganda through the money that you created for yourself, then of course you're going to be a genius. I mean, come on, folks, let's stop calling these people geniuses when all they are massive criminals.
They're read into the cartel's propaganda, into the cartel's plan. And that's the deal. Once you've been in the New York Central Bank,
Yep.
you know that propaganda is your tool. For instance, the US Fed, what do? Propagandize. That's
Yep.
all they ever do. They don't do anything else. They come out and they can raise interest rates, but what is that? That's propaganda stating that the statistics that they base their decisions upon are true. Those are all lies. Since Biden came to power, every single thing that the Fed has said and the US Treasury are lies. The statistics they give you about unemployment, the statistics they give you about manufacturing, about the stock market, anything they say is a lie. And why? They're making markets. That
Yeah.
is their job. The Exchange Stabilization Fund of the US Treasury is nothing more than a propaganda manipulation tool that tries to, when things are going bad, cover their own rears. That's all they do. They do not, matter of fact, the US Treasury, after the stock market closes, makes all kinds of deals when the stock market is closed. People don't understand this. They don't understand that the US Fed, when they say, oh, the new statistics, we're waiting for the first quarter, second quarter, third quarter, statistics on labor and this and that then determines the value and the fluidity of our money. No, it does not. Not when those statistics are lies. You can turn around on the same day that the Fed gives you a statistic and look up other agencies and see what they say, and you'll find the exact opposite. Jamie Dimon is that perfect liar. And what does he do? He controls the derivative markets here in America. The derivative markets are into the trillions, and they are betting. It's a gambling system, just like the New York Stock Exchange, just like the New York Commodities Exchange or the Chicago Commodities Exchange. They're gambling systems based upon fake data that comes from paper.
Yeah.
This is nothing more than made up nonsense. It's nothing more than statistics. You know, there's liars, there's stinking liars, and then there's statisticians. And that's who Jamie Dimon is. He's a statistician. And literally, folks, now we can see with the World Economic Forum that people like Jamie Dimon and George Soros, when they go there, or the Bilderberger Society meeting, which they had recently, what do they tell each other? Lies, because they're all in competition to get the almighty dollar through capitalism, through fake capitalism, because we do not have open markets. We don't have free markets. They are all manipulated, and they're manipulated by the propaganda of the big banksters. And so when you're talking about BlackRock, when you're talking about T. Rowe Price, when you're talking about Vanguard, you basically might as well say that Jamie Dimon is their, what do you call it? He's their boy. He's the one,
Their treasurer.
the fetch and what's it called?
Step and fetch it boy.
Step and fetch it boy. That's who he is. Nothing he says is true, and I suspect that nothing that he's ever told the world about his history is very true. Look at Wikipedia; he's got a pretty short
It's pretty short, actually.
pretty short for someone who basically controls the bankster world, the gangster bankster world, and they have to kiss his ring because why? J.P. Morgan is a Rothschild agent, and Chase Manhattan is a Rockefeller agent. And so you put the two together and you have the two biggest scammers who ever existed in England and America,
Well,
the
I think
Anglo-American group.
the thing that we have discovered now is that another layer of the lying that's been going on is the fact that these people present themselves as Jewish, as Christian, as Turkish, as English. But what we're now seeing in the undercurrent here that goes back many millennia is that they all come from this long line of Babylonian Radhanites who are not Christian, who are not Islamic, that are not Jewish. They are pagans. And these pagans, they worship demons. We know that now. We can see little snippets of this activity in the reports of witchcraft of the bushes or the Bohemian Grove where they mock sacrifice a child, maybe. And we can see their emphasis on certain types of product lines, as we talked about the last time, in gaming, in couponing, in things that draw human nature into sin, into we see it in pornography, we see it in the this worship of celebrity. We can see all of these things occurring, and now it's coming out. They're presenting clothing for children and babies that emphasizes sodomy, sex changes, and things like this. It's the demons are coming out of the woodwork now, and I think part of that reason is because the righteous have called these demons to task and have told these demons to identify themselves. And so they're only doing what they were told to do, and that is come out of the woodwork and start identifying who you are. And so now we see this longer term. These bankers, they don't care about morality. They're into taking down God. And they have been at this task for a long time, 4, 5, 6,000 years in the current iteration of humanity. And so what Jamie is sitting on top of is a whole pretend system, as you have said. They're all lies. And so their lies are so deep. I think some of them don't even know where the original thoughts came from. And if that thought came from a sin, came from a sacrifice of a child, or came from putting a peoples in debt slavery, or pushing people into wars where millions of people were killed, the layering of the depravity is so deep that these bankers are sitting on a mountain of you know what. And so they can't even help themselves anymore. And I think that's where we've got to call um, the righteous of the world to a higher plane, to a higher consciousness, where we actually identify these demonic spirits, because these are not human beings who can control themselves. They're controlled by demons. And Jamie's at the top of one of those demons. So in a sense, he's a victim. But if he's willingly done it, as you have said many times, then he has allowed that demon into his life. And we need to call that demon out. That demon is Mammon. That demon is Lucifer. So there we have it. We have another example. And yeah, it's interesting how close his relationships and his family background is to Boris Johnson's. Why was Boris ever put? I mean, this mop-haired, flop-haired guy. Why was he put in charge of England? It's because he followed orders. And now we see the Smyrna connection with Dimon is a depraved connection of opium trade. The opium that came out of Smyrna and was taken to China to enslave the Chinese in drug addiction is unbelievably heinous in terms of what's going on. In the demon in Smyrna was transferred through Jamie Dimon to JP Morgan Chase. And now that's what we're addressing now.
The big banks have the largest buildings, the largest holdings, the most money, and you can't name a single good thing they've ever done. Not
Right,
one
exactly.
single good deed ever. They do not have any philanthropic arm of JP Morgan Chase. So when you're talking Jamie Dimon, you're talking about a Luciferic being, one of the brightest angels in hell. As a matter of fact, he is the incarnation of Lucifer because of his specters that are created by his lies that turn into phantoms, that turn into demons. And when they're demons, these are laws that govern banking. Well, the laws that govern banking allow them to also be brokers. But hello, that shows their interlocking directorships, complete collusion.
Which
If you are
occurred
the
in
banker who gives the money,
1999.
you know what's going to happen in the stock market. How could you not know? You're providing the money. You know where the money is. You know who you're giving it to and who you're not giving it to, when you can call it back and when you can manipulate it and when you can then throw in your money. He's worth over almost $2 billion now. And he used to make 11 million, 22 million a year, now 34 million a year. Where'd the rest of the money come from? Insider trading. And that's what we're talking about. We're talking about people who are read into what the plan is going to be before the plan happens. Of
Right.
course he is. He was part of the US Fed. He was part of the New York central bank system, which is the
He
most
was and
corrupt.
still is.
And he still is. And he manipulates these things. And so every time I hear him speak, I can't look at him because demons are going in and out of him. They're flying in and out of him like an
Okay.
airport.
Now, that's another conversation I think we're going to have later, but I'm going to go ahead and ask one question. When you were involved with exorcisms and you walked into a bank or near a bank, could you see the demons in that bank?
The demons are as big as the bank buildings themselves.
Is that right?
I can't even walk near a bank building in New York City or in the city of London because the evil is so profound. Yes. And it's so clear and it's so obvious and it's so long lasting. And so the longer the elemental beings that come to serve the demons are in existence, the bigger they get. So you can literally, for instance, in Hawaii with the kapu'u for the death rituals, the Ali'i had beautiful places in Hawaii, but none of the common people were allowed to go there. So to protect them, they would kill hundreds of people with a thing called kapu'u and put a curse upon it so that no one could come near it. There's kapu'u over every major insurance company building, every major bank building that I've ever seen. It makes me want to be sick
I can't
because
believe
these
I've never
demons.
asked you that before.
Oh, they're rampant, and that's the reason I went out and lived out in nature and tried to stay away from all this kind of thing. Because when you go to New York City, you're in the home. The only bigger home for demons is the city of London.
Hmm.
Now there are demons, of course, in the Vatican. There's demons in Washington D.C., especially because they make laws that support these demon worshippers. And they're not just demon worshippers of Mammon; they're also worshiping lust, envy, gluttony, laziness, wrath. These are the people who create wars. Where do you think the money's coming from to go to Zelensky? We don't have any money in America. We've given him 120, well, last I counted with the newest Biden gifts, about $130 billion. It did not go into weapons. It did not go into ammunition. It went straight into the pockets of our own politicians in Ukraine. And who do you think managed that? Goldman Sachs. And who did Jamie Dimon work for? Goldman Sachs. They had every single deal with the fall of the USSR into Russia was done by Goldman Sachs. And
Correct.
sometimes their cut on it was anywhere between 27 to 35% of making oligarchs the rulers of what were state industries.
Yep.
Jamie was right there.
Yuri Milner brought about $200 million to Zuckerberg in 2005 or 6, and that all came from Goldman Sachs in Moscow.
Goldman Sachs is one of the big five dealers for the desk at the New York Central Bank, which is basically the control element for the Fed. That's how they control the flow of money. Matter of fact, that's where the gold is held. Our gold is not held in a mint or in the Fort Knox. It's held in New York, and because of currency exchange, exactly as you said, currency exchange is again another fraudulent activity, and it's propped up by fake assets, and that's what J.P. Morgan Chase does with their silver. They sell, they lease, and they loan, but they don't move the silver and gold. They have more silver and gold American minted coins than anyone else on the face of the earth. And after the crash, they will come out smelling like a rose because there will be a demonic law passed, which is worship of mammon, which will say that these coins will be worth now 10 times their value, 100 times their value. And so Chase Manhattan will come out smelling like a rose. And Jamie Dimon, do you ever see him worry? He doesn't worry. This is like George Soros worrying. No, these people are proud of
No, that's what I said. He's cocky.
They're Satan worshipers and they're proud of it. And they know exactly what's going on. And these are lineages. These are family banksters who turn it over to their own family. They intermarry because why? If you knew these secrets and if you knew the timing, you could become filthy rich. For instance, right now, they have revealed Jamie Dimon's manipulation of silver. So you should be able to, if you had billions of dollars, simply buy long or short on silver based upon the day that they're going to short it or long. And when that happens, the derivatives, because all banks are supported now by, all big banks are supported by derivative betting. And these derivatives are where they get their money. They don't get their money from you putting money in the bank. They usually get it from either directly from the government, from corporate government associations, or they get it through derivative banking. Derivative banking is controlled by the Bank for International Settlements, which was the bank that took the Nazi gold, the bank that took the Japanese gold, the bank that basically is the clearinghouse for all derivatives.
Don't forget the Solomon's gold.
And Solomon's gold, which still today is probably in the Rothschild gold bullion vault, which is the money that backs up the Bank of England, their central bank. And that's why Jamie Dimon didn't want to leave the European Union, because he, like George Soros, wanted did not want Brexit. They wanted to stay in the European Union because they were only 4 or 5 countries away from having all European countries have one central bank, which they would be able to manipulate
He donated.
completely.
He donated $1 million to the Remain program in England.
Which is nothing more than propaganda. Because we know that George Soros, his entire intent was to get control of the European Union Central Bank. And I mean, we can go into the corruption that you can see in these people who are chosen to be the outer agents, the propaganda tool, the propaganda megaphone for these lies. And these are the people that we're supposed to follow the advice from when they give advice at the World Economic Forum.
Yeah, of course.
That's
The propaganda says we should, and that we should revere them. Come on, let's stop that.
It's absolutely ridiculous. If you just had enough money, all you'd have to do is listen to what George Soros says each year at the World Economic Forum, or when he doesn't show up there, he sends out a message. And what will he tell you? Oh, you need to get all your money out of railroads. And then immediately thereafter, we have the largest law, our largest amount of money given through a law through the US Congress for what? The complete reestablishing of the railroad system. George
Yep.
Soros did that with coal. He did it with the green movement. They both do it ad infinitum with the climate change. And remember, every 10 years, they change what climate change is supposed to be doing to us. One time, it's supposed to bring an ice age. 10 years later, it's supposed to bring too much cold. 10 years later, it's supposed to bring too much heat and it's going to melt all the ice and it's going to raise the ocean waters. No, these are all fantastic lies to do what they have now done. The United Nations, which is a British crown agent, essentially,
Absolutely.
and the International Monetary Fund has now, without anybody's permission, changed the reserve currency from the US dollar to the Universal Monetary Unit, the UMU, which they now lovingly call the Unicoin or the
Oh,
unicorn digital currency.
isn't the unicorn one of the elements on the British Crown's logo crest?
Yes, it is,
There you go.
as well as the lion,
The
uh,
lion from Babylon.
the lion from Babylon. And
Yep.
so it's just so transparent once you do your homework. The problem is that people don't do their homework. And we now find our work, especially the work of the miners and the Americans for Innovation, which we, of course, broadcast and publish through Aim for Truth. We find this everywhere. We finally find that what we've been saying for years and years and pointing out now becomes what it's like science. As soon as they discover something new in science, like magnetic transfer flux points, all of a sudden, all scientists say that they knew that.
Mm-hmm.
The books are not changed. Nobody actually teaches this to anyone, certainly not our children. And then they act like they always knew it. And then how do you know that this is part of the propaganda of superstitious science, or basically what is called secular humanism, which is your religion, whether you like it or not? If you don't have a religion, you are given one which says that you believe in settled science called secular humanism. And so what do they say? They're going to tell us that they change the name every year. Why? That's what the British do. When the Brits open a company that's going to be a cheating company, they always have 2 or 3 shell companies behind them. So
Or
when they get
5 or
5,
10.
which you have discovered so many times, it's like such a pattern. It's so
Look at how
pathetic.
many, for example, Lord Mark Malloch Brown, he's got one company called Invesco that has something like 300 different names spun off of Investec. And they're just all over the world. So he's got so many that he knows nobody's going to go checking, especially the lazy journalists that we have running around right now, repeating what's on a chyron on the TV rather than actually doing investigation. But we have done the investigation. This Investec company is one of the most corrupt companies in the world. And by the way, they have invested in all of the software that's running on Chinese banks, as an example.
J.P. Morgan, Chase has had what, 12 different names? You can't, nobody even knows who they go back to, and therefore it's now a
We
moot
do.
point.
We
We
do. The
know
Manhattan
because
Bank.
we're paying attention to history. But most people, there is no history. They don't have a memory that goes past the next commercial. So
Well, to be fair, John, one of the things that's happening now as a result of this social networking invention that we developed is that archivists and libraries and people who don't have any particular propaganda angle have started putting up data that we never had before. Or if you could find it, like Eustace Mullis used to live at the Library of Congress trying to find data from the past to verify a lot of his positions. And we haven't had that other than people who actually lived at these archives or libraries. Now we can find it online. So we're benefiting from this technology that we helped invent. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get the word out, get the truth out, the truth history, which is finding uh, other willing subjects. So more and more people, I think, are starting to pick up on that.
Eustace Mullins was inspired by his teacher, Ezra Pound, who they kept locked up in Washington, D.C. for the whole last part of his life because he knew too much.
He was a real investigator. They didn't like that.
Exactly. Now, what's this guy they always quote?
Carol Quigley.
Carol Quigley. He was a pilgrim. He says
Yes,
in
he
the
was.
front of his book that he believes in their ideas, and then he's supposed to be the one who reveals it.
And
No,
by the way, he never uses the word Pilgrim Society in his research.
precisely. So his research was nothing more than a distraction. It was disinformation. It was leading you down the primrose path to make sure that you didn't look at reality. Now, let's just look at right now. Um, Fox News got sued for $787 million because they made a mistake. They called Dominion, the Canadian founded company, Dominion, which still controls our elections. They make our elections into what I call selections. They are not
Correct.
elections. And so they had to pay out that money. Who'd they pay it to? Themselves, because the owners are the same owners of both companies,
It's a
and
great
they
way to
did
launder
make a
money.
mistake. They had a great way to launder money. And so there was a Chinese company, and they made the huge mistake of saying that Dominion was supported by a Chinese company and the Chinese intervened in our election. Well, the Chinese had been intervening in our elections for a long time. It wasn't the Russians. The Russians tried, but they're nowhere near did they have the infiltration of all of the American systems, including military, politics, corporations. And so they said that China was involved with through Dominion. No, it was involved with a company called Dominion LLC. And because of those three little letters, $787 million had to be paid out even before they went to court because they
Had to
knew,
be.
yeah, they knew they had
What
made
a
the
game.
mistake. They were stupid. Same thing with Mark Malloch Brown, basically the election fixer of all times. Mark Malloch Brown on the Queen's or now the King's Privy Council is the person who controls Optech, which controls every electronic voting machine, whether it's a Dominion, Smartmatic, so on and so forth. When they asked him about this, and they said, "Isn't it true that Smartmatic is the source behind Optech, which is the source behind Dominion, which is the source behind Diebold machines and all the different machines?" He says, "No." And he said this over and over again. I watched 3 interviews where he said this because they didn't get it right. It's Smartmatic LLC or PLC, one or the other. And because of that, because of those 3
PLC.
letters, he was able to say, "I have no association with that, and it has nothing to do with Jimmy Carter and Optech and the elections in Venezuela, which were thrown during Jimmy Carter's presidency." That's when Mark Malloch Brown invented Optech, and he's been using it ever since. There's 3 updates to it. So you have to get your statistics and your information exactly
Yeah,
in.
the research was sloppy on all those lawsuits. And there's a good example of we have a lot of sort of well-meaning attorneys who just do sloppy research and don't get their facts right and then file all these cases that go on for years. I don't know whether they were just doing it ignorantly or intentionally, but what they did is they stalled any kind of effort to get to the truth by these these half truths that they filed and tried to make a case out of. And we had all that research. It was out there. They could have used it and didn't.
Jamie Dimon is against a debt ceiling. Why? Because he is part of the US Federal Reserve, for heaven's
Right.
sakes. He makes money off of that. And I assure you that the biggest money he makes is not his 34 million a year. It's the money that those banksters pay him in offshore accounts.
Sure.
And Cyprus, which we were talking about before, Turkey, the money from Greece all went to Cyprus to offshore accounts and is still there to this day. And Ukrainian money, which we're giving to Zelensky, goes straight to his offshore accounts in Cyprus. Zelensky's hardly ever even in his country. He's not leading a war. He's leading an economic fascist laundering system, which involves our biggest bankers in America. It involves our central banks, and it specifically involves the demonic laws. And when I say that, when you take a lie and you turn it into a fantastic lie, and then you turn it into a law, that's a demon. That
That's
demon goes on until that
that's
law is eradicated. And so
right.
the debt ceiling, Jamie says, no, there can be no debt ceiling. We can't stop the Fed from printing fiat currency because it's about to collapse, and he needs to have this system go right up to the last second. And then when it does, he's going to be in just a perfect condition, because you can bet your bottom dollar, which is worth basically nothing now. You can bet your bottom dollar that Jamie has no money in the stock market. That's a guarantee. Why? Because he has it in real estate. He has it in coins that are minted coins that the U.S. House of Representatives can change a minted coin value overnight by a new law. It's already happened. That's how the Exchange Stabilization Fund was created. Was when gold was revalued and at a new valuation from who? The House of Representatives. All they have to do is take a vote, and then what happens? You get to see that the silver is the real trick. That's the reason we have seen massive amounts of gold leave the New York central bank for the US Federal Reserve and go to foreign countries. We've never done that before. We always just keep moving it back and forth between the cages that are there in the basement of the New York Fed. And also silver. Silver doesn't never moves. Nobody moves any silver. They move paper silver. And who is the biggest holder of paper of silver? Real coin silver, which they can write as many notes on as they want. They can literally write thousands of paper notes on their silver holdings, on their gold holdings, and the assessors of the banks come in. And when Jamie Dimon wants to,
Wait, you're talking about auditing firms
yes,
like Ernst and Young and
yes,
KPMG
yes,
and Price
the
Waterhouse?
biggest liars,
Oh my
maybe.
gosh. Yes.
They're
They're hired
fantastic.
liars. They're hip pocket liars.
Yes. And so they can say that they see on one day a paper note saying that Bank of America has leased, billions, tens of billions of dollars worth of silver, so that they have some assets to back up the fact that all the banks, except the big banks, the 4 or 5 biggest banks in America, they're not going to go bust. They'll just be given more money when the other banks go bust. It's like the TARP money, 25 billion, and Jamie literally said, "Why are you giving this to me? I don't need it. We have plenty of cash." And yet he took it. Where did it go? Well, it went in his pocket. Where do you think it
They
went?
forced they forced all of the banks in the United States to take some of that TARP money. I think they wanted to dirty everybody's hands so nobody would say anything. I had a director who was a director in a small bank in Southern Ohio, and he was saying we didn't need any of that cash, but we were forced to take it.
Off book accounting. When the head of the Fed and the US Treasury were asked what they did with the trillions of dollars for the bank bailout, a few days after they gave the money out, they said in congressional hearings, they don't know where the money went.
Hmm.
And they said, and people shaking their heads going, what do you mean you don't know where that money went? Well, we just don't know where it went. We gave it out to the banks, but we really have no record of it because it was off book accounting. And you say, what is off book accounting?
That's called your second set of books in a organized crime.
Yeah, it's like the 5 trillion that has come up missing at the Pentagon that we know it's probably much, much more. And when Rumsfeld was asked where the money went, he says, we just don't know. How do you not know where trillions of dollars went? And if you are already bankrupt, because all the money we make from taxes every year does nothing more than pay the debt to the US Federal Reserve, we don't have any money. We've
Well,
been working on fake money.
let's be reminded that the offshore banking system set up by the British Crown was set up after 1833, when the banks in the city of London wanted to compensate all their buddies for the slaves they had to give up. And they did that, and they created this huge ledger, a specific ledger, which, by the way, Hamilton Brown, the great great grandfather of Kamala Harris, was a facilitator of in Jamaica. He was a major attorney in that system that was set up, and that was the original offshore banking system. The Rothschilds said, "Okay, fine, we'll compensate everybody. We'll put up 15 million pounds. We'll actually put up 20 million pounds." And then the Parliament came back and said, "No, we want in on this deal." So they put up 5 million pounds. The Rothschilds put up 15 million pounds, and that became the offshore banking system that we have today. We have proven that. We've got the ledgers.
Absolutely. And Kamala Harris and her relatives were part of that. And so when
They
you
were,
hear
absolutely.
Gavin Newsom say, first off, he's against reparations, and now he's for reparations, and he just defaulted on, what was it, tens of billions of dollars that he owes the federal government. He just said, no, I'm defaulting on it. Too bad for you. And he wants to run for president. And what's he going to do? Pay reparations to whom? Where does that money come from?
Right.
All the insiders know money is infinite for their purposes.
Offshore.
And they also know that the fiat currency is complete nonsense because the Fed just keeps printing money. And so they're going to give out tens of billions of dollars in San Francisco and now throughout California for reparations to a state that never had any slaves, to people who can't actually name their relatives that they say were slaves. Well, I'm Irish. And so Kamala Harris owes me reparations because the Irish were taken to her relative. What was his name? Brown.
After 1833, Hamilton Brown started bringing over Irish. He would loan them money in various places in England, and promised them all sorts of land and cattle and a means of production. So they would get them down there. These people couldn't pay back the debt. They became indentured servants, and that was the new slavery. And they did that to the Chinese as well. So
and they worked them to death.
They worked them to death, exactly.
No one ever got out of their indentured servant. They all
did that in America
died.
as well.
And we're talking huge amounts of people. So there has never been a race that has not at one point or the other been a slave to another race or another nation. There's no such thing. So reparations, well, what are they doing? They're basically saying money doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. We can give out. Look at the money that Biden just gave out. Look at the money that Obama gave out. Look at the money that Trump gave out. Where'd that money come from? We're in debt. We're always in debt. We haven't had a balanced budget since, who was it that we had one president who once had a balanced budget for a few years?
Was it Buchanan?
I forget who it was.
He worked for Jackson.
That's it. One president was concerned with a balanced budget. All the rest, of course, they have a debt ceiling. When they say that our debt ceiling is 31 trillion now, that is the tip of the iceberg. They're not talking about the cumulative debt in bad mortgages that have been bundled, which all the banks have, including Jamie. That's why Jamie got the TARP money. It was for his improperly rated bundled mortgages, which were on the stock market, you see. So the central banks started buying up all of this debt, bad debt, so that later they could be bailed out by the government and given huge amounts of money to cover that. Did they get rid of that bad debt? No, they still have 2/3 of it in their portfolio. And it's now, because of MERS, it's being manipulated on the stock market. So it's just a matter of time until it all collapses.
can we go back to Jamie's history? Because I think what we have to do is we have to introduce this new layer that we've discovered in the Babylonian Radhanite merchant banking system, which was the trading system since ancient times with China, back and forth. That Smyrna was a watershed moment. Smyrna was the western seaport of this trade that came from China to Babylon, and then Babylon sent it out through Smyrna to the European markets, including that was on the sea trading side. They had land routes as well, which didn't go through Smyrna. But Smyrna was the key point, the turning point with the Babylonian Radhanite banking system. And there were probably 80 to 100 banks in Smyrna at the time of World War One. And then that all got shifted, as we can tell now, to the city of London, which had already been working with the Babylonian Radhanites, historically the Radnites, 1066, when William the Conqueror took over England. This was before the Knights Templar. This was before the Banks of Venice. And so now we're seeing the full story of banking. For the longest time, a lot of us thought it started in Vienna or Venice, but now we can see it goes way back to the Babylonians, and that they were controlling this mechanism throughout history. And they got their real start with the Solomon's gold, which was then used in banking ever since then. And so Jamie is just another in a long line of Babylonian Radhanites. I doubt if historically his family are Christian. They're probably Babylonian Radhanites who converted. They converted in great Sabbatean style. They just said they were Christians in order to maintain their banking history, and the entire time they were Babylonians, they were Radhanites, they were pagans, and they have always been pagans, and that's why their money is used for such sin today.
In Wikipedia, anytime you're reading about somebody, down at the bottom, they usually have the dirt. There's no dirt on Jamie except for his, what was that, the London whale derivative
Mm-hmm.
scandal and a few other scandals. But hello, take a look. They have had scandal after scandal after scandal, and he has been at the helm when these things happened, and he comes out unscathed. But look closely, he's had throat cancer. Why? Because of all the lies that come out of his mouth. He's had heart problems. Why? Because he's got a cold stone in his heart. He didn't have a heart. Name anything good Jamie Dimon has ever done. Name anything he has ever said that was true and came to pass. No, he is just a mouth for the evil mafia cartel syndicate of banksters that are controlled through the Pilgrim Society, through the City of London, and there's nothing new under the sun. He might as well be. He was like J.P. Morgan himself, who had been a bank teller, but by the time he crossed the Atlantic, he had enough money to open a bank.
Well, he was just the son of Junius P. Morgan and George Peabody's protege. So the Morgans were no geniuses. They got it from Peabody, and who got it from who Peabody and Rothschild were tied at the hip in the mid 1800s.
Now we know the Rockefellers.
George was actually had a funeral in Westminster Abbey. I mean, look at that. Victoria was all over him.
Yes, the Rockefellers we know had a monopoly given to them just before and during the war, and that's what made them so filthy rich. These are banking monopolies.
Right.
These are corporate government agencies that cannot be touched, that when there's any problem, they create a new law. And who writes the laws? They're lobbyists. So the lobbyists for the banksters write the laws, and the people in Congress don't read them. They just pass them because that's who gives
Our
them their money.
system of government, as we can see now, was a copy, kind of like a doppelganger of the British system, which had been operating for many centuries, and they knew how to do it. And what they have been doing is morphing our system into a copy of the British system so that they could have courts, which were not accountable to the people. They could have banks, which were not accountable to the people. And all these things that we added as layers after the revolution, they have pretty much undone now. And now we have crown agents running all over the U.S. We have the Princess Trust operating all over the U.S. with Kamala Harris's handler, Sir Nigel Knowles, running things, who is close buddies with the King Charles. I said George the other day. I kept saying George the Third the other day, and you finally corrected me. But we're talking about Charles. And then we have the copy of the Crown Agents in the U.S. called the Senior Executive Service. 10,000 employees in the system that are not answerable to anyone except the British Crown. The Senior Executive Service. Nobody's heard of that, and yet it is running our government, and it is British.
When you say the name of a demon, they show up. And so that's why you probably didn't want to say Charles III, because then his evil would appear. And
Probably.
that's a fact, you know. And so here's the new deal. The new deal is every one of these corporations has to now subscribe, and that's the reason we get the Bud Light and the Target problems that we see going on. They have to subscribe to ESG, called Environmental Social Governance. Go check it out now. Google it. You're going to find out they added the operative word. It's now not ESG, it's ESCG, Environmental Social Corporate Governance.
There you go.
We do not have a government. We have a corporatocracy. We do not have capitalism. We have crony capitalism that goes back to Babylonian Radhanites.
That's called fascism, by the way.
Right, fascism. It's economic fascism or predatory economics, and we do not have a democracy. They constantly claim that we're fighting for democracy over the world. There's no such thing. We don't have a democracy. We have a constitutional republic, and our representatives are like the aristocracy of the crown. They are as corrupt as they possibly can be, and if they ever get in trouble, they have a star chamber, a grand jury indictment that sweeps all the evidence under the rug, like just happened with Durham's report about the Russian interference in our election. We pointed out who it was. It wasn't the Russians. It was the Global Engagement Center that was funded and created by Obama and ran by the British, by the Strategic Communication Laboratory. So, folks, truth history that we are presenting to you is a new way of seeing through the fog of economic fascist war. And so we are, again, pointing out that if you want to be a good gangster, a good bankster gangster, you better kiss the ring of Jamie Dimon.